Welcome and settle in. This is the Sleeping Hourglass. Tonight, we drift toward a damp meadow beside a slow English river where kings arrive uneasy, barons arrive armed not with blades but with words, and the future waits patiently in ink not yet dry. This is not a tale of instant freedom or of power suddenly turning kind. It is a gentler, truer story of tension, of pride meeting fear, of authority discovering for the first time that it can bend. If this peaceful corner of time brings you comfort, a quiet like or subscription helps keep it glowing. John becomes king not with trumpets, but with exhaustion already in his bones. He is young, yet the crown settles on him like a cold weight borrowed from older failures. His father's shadow lingers in every corridor, long and unkind, whispering expectations without guidance. The stone walls of England's castles watch him silently, remembering stronger hands, louder voices. Courtiers bow, but their eyes measure rather than admire. They see not destiny, but uncertainty wrapped in gold. At night, when torches dim and footsteps fade, the crown does not sleep, it presses. It reminds. Rule is not a gift, it is an accounting. Every breath carries the sound of debts unpaid, wars unfinished, promises inherited like rusted chains. Power arrives here already tired, already defensive, already afraid of slipping. Even coronation robes cannot soften the knowledge that crowns magnify weakness as easily as strength, and history watches closely tonight in silence. He inherits a realm stretched thin by ambition and loss. Across the Channel, Normandy has slipped away, not in a single blow, but in humiliating increments. Messengers arrive with lowered voices, carrying maps that seem to shrink each time they are unfolded. Land is not just soil, it is pride, lineage, and leverage. John feels each loss as a tightening ring. To lose territory is to invite challenge, to appear smaller than the crown suggests. Nobles remember victories his brother won. They compare quietly, cruelly. The past becomes a measuring rod pressed against the present. John answers absence with demand, filling silence with commands. Authority, when insecure, speaks louder. Yet beneath the proclamations something fragile forms, the sense that power, once questioned, never fully recovers its innocence. It learns to defend itself constantly, mistaking pressure for strength and motion for control, while fear sharpens every decision made in restless hours. Money becomes the language John trusts most. Coins clink louder than counsel. Taxes rise not as cruelty alone, but as calculation, a ruler's arithmetic of survival. Sheriffs ride outward, carrying tallies instead of mercy. In manor halls, candles burn low as barons count what is taken and what remains. Each levy feels personal, an insult disguised as necessity. Loyalty, once assumed, now asks questions. How much must obedience cost? John listens to ledgers and hears obedience in numbers, not hearts. He does not see resentment growing like a slow bruise. Pressure, applied without pause, teaches silence first, then resistance. Power, when it squeezes too tightly, discovers how easily trust escapes its grasp. It is not anger yet, only the quiet rearranging of loyalties, the careful remembering of slights. The patience learned by those waiting for imbalance to reveal itself in due time, beneath polite bows and measured words spoken softly. The church, too, turns complicated. When John quarrels with Rome, the quarrel reaches every village. Bells fall silent, doors remain closed. The absence of sound becomes heavier than noise. People feel faith interrupted, as if heaven itself pauses. An interdict is not a sword, yet it cuts deeply, removing comfort rather than blood. John learns that power does not end at the edge of a crown. Spiritual authority resists his will, calmly, persistently. He yields only when isolation threatens his rule. Submission here is strategic, not repentant. The crown bends, but the neck remains stiff. Even compromise feels like loss. And loss, for this king, has become unbearable. He senses forces he cannot tax or threaten, and the realization unsettles him more than armies, because it exposes limits he cannot command away with parchment or proclamations, reminding him that authority is never absolute, only borrowed, briefly, uneasily, from belief itself. Promises begin to thin. Agreements are spoken, then quietly undone. Trust phrased not with spectacle, but with repetition. Barons gather in small rooms, voices measured, emotions contained. This is not rebellion yet. It is a counting of another kind. They remember oaths, customs, and rites older than John himself. The king, meanwhile, hears disloyalty where concern leaves. Fear bends his listening. Each misunderstanding stacks like kindling. The realm grows tense, as if holding breath. Power, feeling challenged, tightens its grip again, unaware that pressure is teaching others how to stand without it. In these quiet gatherings, something unnamed forms. A shared patience, a resolve shaped by restraint, where correction feels necessary and obedience begins to ask whether it must always mean surrender rather than mutual obligation, and whether power should answer to memory, law, and expectation, not merely command habit and fear alone, slowly, carefully, without noise or haste yet present. John senses the change without naming it. Letters travel. Oaths whisper from hall to hall. No banners rise, yet movement fills the air. He rides often, guarded, restless, listening for loyalty and hearing only uncertainty. The crown feels heavier now, not because it has changed, but because those beneath it have. Power depends on belief, and belief is shifting. The king tightens ceremony, authority, distance. Yet distance breeds imagination, and imagination breeds resolve. Something inevitable approaches, not with speed, but with calm. History rarely announces itself loudly. It gathers quietly like clouds without thunder. The realm stands at a threshold, unaware of the meadow waiting ahead, where fear will meet and words will attempt what force cannot achieve, binding power to memory, expectation, and restraint, though none yet know the place, the day, or the cost of listening instead of striking, breathing instead of shouting, pausing instead of rule. This is where the chapter rests, before the meeting, before the meadow, before the parchment waits. A king wears his crown and feels watched by time. Barons wait with patience learned from loss. England breathes shallow, aware something must give. Power has not fallen, but it has begun to doubt itself, and doubt, once born, does not sleep easily. It keeps vigil, watching the road ahead, where a river flows quietly, indifferent to kings, yet ready to witness restraint. The weight of the crown has revealed its first crack, and through it, possibility enters, slow and uncertain, carrying the promise that authority might one day learn to listen not as weakness, but as survival, as memory, as law forming quietly in human hands, waiting for a place to rest, a moment to be spoken, and a king brave enough, or cornered enough, to hear it breathe beside a river bank. Across the narrow stretch of water that separates England from the continent, the world is changing its balance. The channel does not widen, yet it feels farther now. On the far shore, banners move where they once stood still. Towns that spoke English loyalty begin to answer to French command. Normandy, once a certainty, becomes a question, then a regret, then a memory folded carefully away. Loss does not arrive all at once. It comes in fragments, a fortress here, a road there. A treaty signed under pressure and regret. Each piece gone makes the rest harder to hold. John feels the empire thinning, not dramatically, but persistently, like fabric worn soft by constant pulling. Power weakens not only through defeat, but through erosion, through the steady certainty that what was inherited cannot always be kept. Messengers cross the water with uneasy hearts. Their cloaks smell of rain and road dust. They stand before the king, choosing words as if they were stepping stones over cold water. The garrison holds, one says, pausing, then adding, for now. Another clears his throat before admitting, the men are tired. No one speaks of inevitability aloud, yet it hangs in the air, heavier than armor. John listens with narrowed eyes, hearing not information but accusation. Each report feels personal. Every lost mile seems a reflection of his worth. He waves them away when their news grows thin. Silence, he believes, might slow reality, yet maps do not lie quietly. They shrink in candlelight, borders retreating inward, reminding him that kings inherit geography, but must fight to keep it believing in them. War consumes without gratitude. It takes coin, grain, men, and sleep. England's wealth flows outward, crossing the channel in ships heavy with taxes, meant to return as victory. Instead, it dissolves into skirmishes, bribes, and broken alliances. Barons feel the pull immediately. They are asked for more knights, more silver, more patience. In great halls, benches creak as men shift uncomfortably, listening to demands repeated without explanation. One baron leans toward another and murmurs, barely audible, "How long?" The other answers with a sigh, "Until there is nothing left to give." These conversations do not reach the king's ears, yet they shape the ground beneath his authority. War teaches rulers to take, but it teaches subjects to remember. Every contribution is counted twice, once in ledgers, once in resentment. France grows confident. Philip moves with steady assurance, tightening his hold not through reckless charge, but through waiting. He understands that time, once aligned with purpose, can defeat force. John, by contrast, rushes. He sends orders faster than they can be fulfilled. He raises levies before wounds have healed. Pressure becomes his instrument, applied everywhere at once. Yet pressure, spread too thin, loses effectiveness. It creates cracks instead of cohesion. The English treasury echoes when opened, its hollowness masked by optimism that no longer convinces. Even victory, when it comes, feels small and temporary, unable to outweigh the weight of loss already absorbed by the realm. War, once a means to secure authority, becomes a mirror reflecting vulnerability back upon the crown. The people feel it in smaller ways. Markets tighten, bread costs more, roads grow less safe as soldiers drift home unpaid. Priests offer prayers for peace that sound more like pleas. The countryside does not understand the logic of continental politics, only the consequences. Fields do not care who rules Normandy. They care who eats the harvest. John remains distant from this understanding, measuring success by territory regained rather than stability preserved. His advisors speak carefully. One dares to say, "Sire," perhaps restraint. John cuts him off with a glance sharp enough to silence the room. Restraint feels like surrender. To pause feels like weakness, and weakness, he believes, invites collapse. Yet the realm senses that relentless motion may be its own kind of falling, quieter but just as final. As losses accumulate, so do demands. Taxes rise again, justified by necessity, explained as temporary, enforced as permanent. Sheriffs knock more often. Tallies lengthen. Barons comply, but their compliance grows thin. Loyalty shifts from instinct to calculation. They begin to ask what the crown protects and at what cost. John hears obedience and assumes agreement. He does not see the careful distance growing between command and consent. The empire, once a source of pride, now feels like a drain pulling everything toward its vanishing edges. To hold it, he tightens his grip. Yet sand slips faster when squeezed. Power grasped too tightly teaches escape. It is a lesson John has not learned, though the signs surround him in whispers, in glances, in the way conversations end when he enters a room. The channel continues its quiet work, separating ambition from reality. Ships return lighter than they left. Letters arrive sealed with regret. John stands before his maps again, tracing borders with a finger that hesitates where certainty once lived. He is losing not only land, but confidence, his own and that of those who follow him. War has stripped the empire down to its cost, and the cost is beginning to feel unbearable. The king demands more because he cannot afford to admit loss. To stop would be to acknowledge limits, and limits, once named, invite questions far more dangerous than armies. Questions about obligation, about fairness, about whether a ruler's need justifies endless sacrifice. Night settles over the realm with uneasy calm. Torches flicker in halls where decisions wait unresolved. The empire still exists, but more as memory than certainty. What remains is strain, financial, emotional, and moral, stretching bonds that once felt unbreakable. John does not yet see where this road leads. He only knows that holding on requires more effort each day, and effort without trust becomes force. Force without agreement becomes fear. The empire slips onward, grain by grain, toward a reckoning not yet named, carried forward by war's exhaustion and the quiet counting of those asked to pay for distant losses. Money moves before emotion does. Long before anger finds words, coin changes hands. Silver leaves manor chests and flows upward, measured and cold. John's government does not arrive with cruelty announced, but with routine. Tallies are written, seals are pressed. What was once occasional becomes frequent, what was once explained becomes expected. Taxes rise quietly, like water seeping through stone, unnoticed at first, undeniable once it reaches the knees. Barons sit alone with their ledgers, candles flickering low, counting obligations rather than wealth. Each mark feels heavier than the last. This is not rebellion yet. It is arithmetic weighed against memory, a slow realization that service is becoming extraction, and loyalty is being priced without consent. The halls where decisions are made remain calm on the surface. Voices stay low. Etiquette survives. Cups are raised, toasts spoken, gestures preserved. Yet beneath the ritual, something stiffens. Coins clink too often. A baron pauses mid-count, then exhales sharply. Again, he murmurs not to accuse, but to confirm. Another answers with a tired nod. No one raises a fist, no one shouts. They have learned restraint from generations of obedience. But silence begins to change shape. It no longer means agreement. It becomes storage, a place where grievance is kept, catalogued, remembered. In these rooms, patience does not fade. It hardens, learning how to wait without hope, how to endure without forgetting. John receives reports stripped of emotion. Numbers please him because they do not argue. They arrive obedient, aligned, predictable. He studies them as proof that authority still functions. When advisors suggest caution, he hears delay. When they mention fatigue among the nobility, he hears exaggeration. "They have it," he says once, briefly. "They will give it." The statement closes discussion. He does not hear what is unsaid. That possession does not equal willingness, and willingness, once broken, does not return easily. Power, when focused solely on supply, forgets to listen for strain. It assumes endurance is infinite. It mistakes quiet for consent and obedience for belief. Outside the halls, the burden spreads. Knights sell horses. Estates tighten rations. Obligations ripple downward, touching those who have no voice at all. The realm feels thinner, stretched. Even the air in council chambers seems taut. John moves through it unaware, protected by ceremony. His crown shines. His authority remains unchallenged, visibly. Invisibly, however, something is shifting. The old assumption that the king's need outweighs all others begins to crack. It is not denied yet. It is questioned inwardly, privately, in places where questions grow roots before they grow sound. At night, barons gather without banners. A fire burns low. Conversation circles carefully, as if afraid to wake something dangerous. "How long?" one asks softly, before there is nothing left. Another answers, after a pause, before or after we are blamed. A faint, humorless smile passes, then disappears. They do not speak of resistance. They speak of limits, of customs remembered, of promises older than the present reign. Silence thickens again, but now it carries meaning. This is not conspiracy. It is recognition, shared, steady, and restrained. John senses distance growing, though he names it ingratitude. He presses harder, believing pressure will restore balance. The more he demands, the quieter the response becomes. Silence no longer empties, it fills. Resentment, denied a voice, learns another language. It learns patience. It learns memory. It learns how to stand still and wait for its moment. History often turns not on fury, but on endurance misunderstood. Power rarely notices the quiet until it answers back with structure instead of sound. Coins continue to move. Ledgers close. Obligations are met. On the surface, the system works. Yet beneath it, belief thins. Trust, once assumed, now requires proof. The crown still commands, but it no longer reassures. Authority, felt only as demand, begins to feel foreign. This is how resentment matures, not in riots, but in rooms lit by candles, in careful conversations, in the shared understanding that something essential is being taken without being asked. The king listens still, but only to numbers. He does not hear the silence changing its tone. He does not yet recognize that what is withheld now is not coin, but consent. The realm holds its breath, not in defiance, but in calculation, and calculation, once awakened, does not sleep easily. The quarrel begins quietly, as many fractures do, with disagreement dressed as authority. A bishopric stands empty, its silence heavier than stone. John believes the choice should be his. Rome believes otherwise. Letters cross seas and borders, each sealed with certainty. Words harden as they travel. What begins as argument soon becomes defiance. John has contested barons, rivals, even his own people. But this is different. Here stands an authority that does not answer to swords or silver. The church does not hurry. It waits, knowing time itself is on its side. And when patience is exhausted, it does not strike, it withdraws. England awakens one morning to quiet that feels unnatural. Church doors remain closed. Candles stay unlit. Bells do not ring. The interdict settles over the land like a held breath. Marriages go unwitnessed. Burials lack blessing. Prayers linger unanswered in stone naves grown cold. Faith does not disappear, but it is interrupted. People speak in hushed voices, uncertain whom to blame, king or God. The absence becomes communal. Even those far from courts feel the rupture. Religion, once rhythm, now feels suspended. It is not pain that startles most, but silence. Silence where there was comfort. Silence where forgiveness once flowed freely. The realm senses something sacred has been touched without consent. John rages at first. He confiscates lands. He mocks the threat. Let them keep their bells, he says sharply, pacing. I have castles. His advisors exchange glances, careful. One speaks softly, Sire, the people feel this. John dismisses him with a wave. He believes faith, like loyalty, can be compelled. He has not yet learned that belief withdraws when cornered. The church does not shout back. It waits, and waiting proves powerful. As months stretch on, unease grows. The king's authority feels louder, harsher, standing alone without ritual to soften it. Power, stripped of blessing, begins to feel exposed. In villages and towns, people light candles at home, whispering prayers without guidance. Some glance toward the castle with quiet resentment, others toward heaven with confusion. Faith becomes fragile, personal, uncertain. John senses the shift, though he names it disobedience. He responds as he has before, with pressure. Yet pressure only sharpens the absence. What once felt abstract now presses close. The church's withdrawal reveals how deeply woven it is into daily life. Without it, authority feels incomplete. As though missing a pillar it assumed permanent. The king stands taller in defiance, but inside, worry stirs. Isolation spreads like damp through stone. Years pass this way, faith suspended, tension thick. Then Rome acts again. John himself is named. Excommunication falls, not loudly, but definitively. Suddenly, the quarrel narrows to one man. The king stands alone beneath a spiritual judgment that cannot be taxed away. His enemies notice. Foreign rulers observe. France watches with interest. A king without the church's favor becomes vulnerable. John understands this language. Power has rules even it must respect. For the first time, resistance costs him not money, but security. The pressure he once applied returns heavier, colder. At last he yields. Not in repentance, but calculation. He submits publicly, offering England as a fief to the Pope, kneeling where he once commanded. The act wounds his pride deeply. Those who witness it feel no triumph, only unease. This bending does not restore trust. It reveals fragility. The king regains the church's favor, but loses something else. The sense that his authority stands whole. Faith returns to England's churches, bells ringing once more, but the echo feels altered. People remember the silence. Memory lingers longer than ceremony. John resumes rule, yet something has shifted permanently. He has learned that power meets boundaries it cannot redraw. The church, calm and distant, remains. The king, chastened and wary, grows more defensive. Faith, once sanctuary, has become terrain contested. Authority, once unquestioned, now feels conditional. The people, watching quietly, absorb the lesson. If even a king must kneel, then perhaps obedience is not endless. Perhaps power is not divine by nature, but granted, and therefore answerable. Night settles again over England, bells ringing softly into darkness. Peace returns on the surface, yet beneath it lies awareness. That belief can be withheld, that authority can be paused, that silence itself can judge. John walks his halls alone, crown heavy, faith restored but trust thinned. He has bent but not learned, and history senses this. For each battlefield teaches its own lesson, and the next will not be fought with prayers or curses, but with words shaped by memory, patience, and quiet resolve. Trust rarely shatters in a single moment. It thins first. It stretches. It is tested, repaired, tested again, until one day it no longer holds weight. In John's England, promises have become fragile things, spoken with ceremony, then loosened by convenience. Oaths are sworn in daylight and revised by night. What was agreed upon last season is quietly reinterpreted this one. No announcement is made. No apology offered. Power assumes memory is short. It is not. Those who live by obligation remember every alteration, every condition changed after consent was given. Trust does not protest loudly. It withdraws step by careful step. The barons begin to gather more often now, not with banners, but with purpose. They meet in halls where the fire burns low and the doors remain closed. These are not conspirators' rooms. They are places of reckoning. Men who have served faithfully sit with shoulders heavy from years of compliance. Their voices are calm, their words chosen with restraint. One says, quietly, he swore it would end. Another replies, after a pause, he swore many things. No one interrupts. Silence carries the weight of agreement. This is not rebellion. It is accounting. Moral, historical, personal. John continues to rule as before, issuing commands, renewing levies, asserting authority with increasing insistence. He believes firmness will restore confidence. He does not understand that confidence, once broken, cannot be commanded back into place. Each reversed promise leaves a mark. Each exception becomes precedent. The barons obey still, but obedience is no longer trust's companion. It has become habit, enforced by fear and tradition rather than belief. Power still functions, but something essential is missing. The realm moves, yet it no longer moves together. In these meetings, the past is spoken gently. Customs older than John are remembered aloud. My father stood for this, one baron says softly, and his father before him. Another nods. We are not asking for new rights, he replies, only that old ones be kept. The language is careful, almost reverent. They are not radicals. They are custodians of memory, unsettled by how easily memory is dismissed by a crown too focused on survival to notice erosion. Trust breaks not because rulers err, but because they refuse to acknowledge error when it is named. John hears rumors of these gatherings and dismisses them as grumbling. They will tire, he says. They always do. His confidence rests on precedent. The barons have yielded before. They have complained before. He believes this moment no different. What he misses is tone. The complaints have softened, not sharpened. Anger has cooled into resolve. Resolve does not burn quickly. It endures. Where fury seeks release, resolve seeks structure. It does not shout. It prepares. The realm feels quieter now, as if holding itself still. Conversations end sooner when the king's name is spoken. Agreements are read twice, not once. Promises are written down, not trusted to memory. This shift is subtle but profound. It signals a change in how authority is received. Power once assumed goodwill. Now it meets scrutiny. That scrutiny is polite, informed, and patient, far more dangerous than rage. History often turns not on rebellion, but on insistence that words must mean what they say. One evening, a younger baron asks, almost hesitantly, what if he will not listen? An older one answers without heat, then we must speak in a way he cannot ignore. The fire crackles. No one asks what that means. They already know. Speaking, in this sense, is not violence. It is clarity. It is naming limits aloud. Trust, once broken, cannot be repaired with silence. It requires acknowledgement. and acknowledgement, for power unused to restraint feels like defeat. John grows increasingly isolated. Advisors choose caution over honesty. Praise replaces counsel. The king mistakes quiet halls for stability. He does not hear the deeper sound beneath, the careful aligning of expectation, memory, and resolve beyond his reach. When trust breaks, it does not fall apart. It rearranges itself elsewhere. It binds those who feel wronged not by passion, but by shared recognition. They are no longer alone in their doubts. Doubt shared becomes strength. England stands at an edge invisible to most. The machinery of rule still turns. Taxes are collected. Courts sit. Orders are obeyed. Yet beneath this functioning surface lies fracture. Trust has been spoken aloud, not yet to the king, but among those who once believed his word sufficient. Once spoken, it cannot be unspoken. Words, like seeds, wait for conditions to grow, and the conditions are ripening quietly. Night settles over the realm again. Candles burn low in halls where men prepare not for war, but for speech. What approaches is not chaos, but confrontation shaped by restraint. The breaking of trust has found its voice, measured, calm, and impossible to dismiss. Storms do not always announce themselves with thunder. Some arrive as pauses in conversation, as glances held a moment too long, as letters sealed with care and sent quietly into the night. England feels such a change now. Across the land, something subtle begins to shift, not in the clash of steel, but in the steady movement of words. Men who once complained alone now listen to one another. Grievances that once felt private are spoken aloud, carefully, deliberately, as though naming them gives them weight. In halls warmed by low fires and candlelight, barons sit closer than before, not as rebels, not yet. As men comparing wounds, they speak of debts demanded without warning, of justice delayed until coin appears, of promises made and unmade with equal ease. They speak softly not because they are afraid, but because they are thinking. What binds them is not rage, it is exhaustion. For years they have carried the burden of a crown that does not rest lightly. They have answered calls for men and money. They have watched lands across the sea slip away while the cost of their defense remains. Each has endured in isolation, believing his grievance singular, his patience a private test of loyalty. Now they discover how many share the same weight. Oaths begin to form, not the loud, sacred vows of war, but quieter ones, spoken between measured breaths. They swear not to overthrow the king, but to restrain him. Not to destroy the crown, but to remind it of its purpose. These are dangerous distinctions, carefully chosen. Words matter now. Letters begin to travel the roads of England, folded neatly, sealed with wax. They carry no threats, only intentions. They move faster than armies ever could, passing from hand to hand, from manor to monastery, from lord to lord. Each letter adds another voice to a growing chorus that has not yet learned how loud it will become. The king hears rumours first. John sits in chambers that feel smaller than before. He notices how messengers hesitate before speaking, how silence stretches after names are mentioned. He senses, as rulers often do, that something is happening just beyond his sight. Not an attack, but a coordination. He cannot yet name it, but he feels its outline pressing against the walls of his authority. He responds as he always has, Ali, with suspicion. Every meeting feels like a test, every request like a challenge disguised as courtesy. He listens for betrayal in ordinary speech. Trust, already thin, grows brittle. Power begins to feel less like command and more like vigilance. Meanwhile, the barons continue their careful work. They meet not in crowds, but in chosen places. In abbeys where stone absorbs sound, in fields where wind carries words away. Their conversations are deliberate, almost restrained, as if they know that anger would undo them. They speak of law, not as an abstract idea, but as memory, as something older than any living king. They remember customs once honored, limits once understood. They recall a time when the crown ruled but did not consume. What they seek is not innovation, it is restoration. From these conversations emerges a document not yet written, but already imagined. A list of demands shaped by precedent and patience, each clause discussed, weighed, argued over. They debate language more fiercely than outcomes, knowing that the right words can bind power more securely than chains. This is where the storm gathers its force. In careful phrasing, John, for his part, does not sit idle. He calculates. He counts allies and enemies, real and imagined. He remembers betrayals vividly and kindness faintly. He considers force, as kings often do, but senses that swords may arrive too late. The opposition he faces does not yet stand in open rebellion. It stands in unity, and that unsettles him more than defiance. He feels watched not by eyes, but by expectations. There is a tension in the air of England now, something held rather than expressed. Roads seem quieter, castles more alert. Men measure their words, aware that history listens even when it appears to sleep. The church, having withdrawn its blessing before, watches closely. Merchants sense uncertainty and count their risks. Common folk feel it in the rhythm of daily life. A pause where certainty once lived. No one speaks of war, yet everyone feels the pressure of choice. This is the moment before declaration. What makes it powerful is not inevitability, but restraint. Both sides still believe something can be salvaged. That correction is possible without collapse. That authority can be reminded, not replaced. The barons do not march, they assemble. The king does not flee, he waits. And so the storm gathers, not as violence, but as alignment. Men discover that shared resolve can be more formidable than individual fury. Power learns that its greatest threat is not opposition, but coherence. History often remembers the breaking point, the battle, the signing, the fall. It forgets this quieter hour when patience becomes strategy and fear becomes clarity. Yet this is where the future is decided, long before ink touches parchment. In this gathering stillness, England inhales. No banners fly yet. No swords leave their sheaths. But the air itself feels heavier, charged with meaning. Something is approaching that will require a meeting neither side truly wants, yet neither can avoid. The storm does not rush. It waits, organized, deliberate, inevitable. The road to Runnymede does not look like a road to history. It winds through ordinary land, through hedges and open fields, past villages that do not yet know their names will one day be footnotes. The sky hangs low and undecided. The earth holds the prints of many travellers, none of them heroic. King John rides east beneath banners that feel heavier than silk. His horse moves steadily, but his thoughts do not. He keeps his counsel close, his guards closer. Every mile feels measured, not in distance, but in consequence. This is not a journey of triumph. It is a journey of necessity. He has delayed as long as he dares. Behind him, the machinery of kingship creaks. Clerks, seals, instructions half formed. Ahead of him waits something he does not fully control. John understands force. He understands threat. What he approaches now resists both. The barons ride on separate roads, not as an army, but as a convergence. They do not hurry. There is no need. Their pace is intentional, almost gentle. They have already agreed on what matters. Silence, for them, is not uncertainty. It is confidence. Their armor catches light in brief flashes, then dulls again beneath dust. These are not men dressed for spectacle. They ride with purpose, not pride. Each carries private fears, but also a shared resolve that steadies the reins in their hands. The countryside watches them pass without comment. Horses breathe in rhythm, leather creaks, metal shifts softly. The sounds are intimate, repetitive, almost soothing. The quiet music of movement before decision. No crowds gather. No one cheers or curses. England does not yet realize it is being rewritten. John's mind circles familiar thoughts. He wonders who among the barons can still be swayed, who still fears him enough to bend. He remembers past submissions, past victories that felt permanent at the time. Authority once challenged feels thinner. He senses it now like a chill beneath his cloak. He is not without options, but none are clean. The church watches. Rome listens. Allies are distant. The treasury is lighter than it should be. Force would be costly. Delay would be dangerous. Agreement would feel like surrender. The road offers no easy answer, only forward motion. Across fields and streams, the barons consider their own risks. They know the king's temper. They know his history of promises made and broken. They do not trust his goodwill, only the weight of their unity. This is why they move together, even when apart. They are careful not to appear threatening. No raised banners. No shouted orders. Their power lies not in intimidation, but in presence. They are many, and they are resolved, and they have learned patience. The meadow comes into view slowly. Runnymede stretches wide beside the Thames, unremarkable at first glance. Grass bends in the wind. The river moves with indifferent grace. There are no walls here, no throne, no shelter from consequence. It is a place chosen precisely because it belongs to no one. Neutral ground. Tents rise cautiously like thoughts not yet spoken. Lines are drawn without fortification. Space itself becomes a form of diplomacy. Who stands where matters? Who approaches first matters? Even silence is measured. John arrives and feels exposed. There is no elevation here, no stone to place him above others. He is a king standing on grass like any man. The crown does not rest on his head. It waits elsewhere, symbolic and absent. Authority, stripped of architecture, feels suddenly negotiable. The barons arrive and wait. They do not press forward. They do not kneel. They stand as men accustomed to land and responsibility, to seasons and boundaries. Their calm unsettles more than anger ever could. They are not here to plead. They are here to insist. The air between them holds tension, but not hostility. This is not a battlefield. It is something stranger, a pause in the usual order of things. Power and resistance face each other without disguise. Voices begin quietly. Introductions are unnecessary. Everyone knows the stakes. Clerks prepare parchment. Witnesses linger at the edges. The river flows on, uninterested in clauses or crowns. Its steady movement feels almost judgmental in its indifference. John listens, his expression guarded. He hears demands framed as customs, limits described as traditions, authority addressed not as divine right, but as responsibility. Each word presses against his sense of self, not violently, but persistently. He answers carefully, choosing phrases that preserve space for retreat. He offers acknowledgments without concessions, patience without promise. Yet even as he speaks, He knows the moment is slipping from him. The meeting itself is the concession. Around them, England holds its breath. No single sentence changes the world yet. No seal is pressed. No agreement finalized. But something irreversible has occurred simply by gathering here. The king has come because he must. The barons have waited because they can. History often hides in such moments, not in action, but in alignment. The meadow absorbs everything, the shifting feet, the murmured counsel, the long looks exchanged between rivals who understand one another too well. There is no thunder, no prophecy, only men negotiating the boundaries of power under an undecided sky. As the day wears on, fatigue replaces tension. Guards relax their grips, voices soften further. The outlines of something new begin to appear, not yet written, but imagined. When evening approaches, nothing is resolved, yet nothing can return to how it was. The road to this meadow has changed everyone who travelled it. Tomorrow will demand ink, precision, and courage of a different kind. For now, the meadow remains what it has always been: open, patient, waiting. Runnymede offers no shelter from consequence. There are no walls to soften voices, no raised days to lift one man above another. Only grass pressed flat by many feet, canvas tents breathing gently in the wind, and the river sliding past with a patience learned long before kings. Here, power arrives stripped of ceremony. It must stand as it is. The meadow stretches wide, and yet everyone feels close. Distance becomes a calculation. Every step forward weighs more than a mile of road. Men pause before crossing invisible lines, sensing that the space between them is already filled with expectation. Tents rise cautiously, arranged not for comfort but for balance. They stand like punctuation marks in an unfinished sentence, pauses rather than conclusions. Canvas flaps stir, revealing glimpses of parchment, of hands clasped behind backs, of faces trained into neutrality. The king waits within his own enclosure, guarded but not isolated. His presence presses outward, felt even when unseen. He listens to the sounds beyond the tent, the murmurs, the shifting feet, and knows that authority alone no longer commands silence. Nearby, the barons gather in small groups, never too large, never too loud. They speak in low tones, words measured as carefully as coin. Each understands that careless speech could fracture what has taken so long to assemble. A greeting is exchanged across the grass. "Good day, my lord," one voice offers, respectful but firm. And to you comes the reply, equally restrained. Nothing more is said. Nothing more is needed. Trust does not live here. It hovers just beyond reach, something remembered rather than possessed. Every man present carries a history of disappointments, of assurances quietly withdrawn. Suspicion moves like a second wind through the meadow, invisible but constant. Yet fear, strangely, is shared. John fears loss, of authority, of control, of the image that sustains his crown. The barons fear deception, that promises will dissolve once they return to their lands. Both sides understand what failure would mean. Not merely conflict, but unraveling. This is what binds them to the meadow. Clerks sit with ink and parchment, waiting. Their hands are steady, but their eyes betray awareness. They know words spoken here may outlast the men who speak them. They dip quills slowly, as if already sensing the weight to come. The river moves beside them, indifferent and eternal. Its surface reflects sky and tent alike, untroubled by debate. It does not pause. It does not listen. In its quiet persistence, it offers an unspoken reminder: everything else will pass. "Custom," one baron says quietly, as though invoking an old friend. Precedent, another answers, nodding once. John responds later, his voice controlled. The crown must rule. Yes, comes the reply, gentle but unyielding. But not alone. No one raises their voice. No one gestures broadly. The drama of the moment lies not in expression, but in restraint. Each sentence is shaped to avoid insult, to leave room for retreat. Diplomacy here is not elegance but survival. Time slows. Hours stretch, marked only by the shifting of light and the subtle migration of shadows across the grass. Hunger is ignored. Fatigue becomes a tool, softening edges, lowering defenses. The longer they remain, the more inevitable agreement begins to feel, not as resolution, but as relief. John paces when alone, stopping often, hands clasped behind his back. He considers force again, briefly, then releases the thought. Too many witnesses, too many eyes. The meadow itself feels like a ledger, recording every hesitation. The barons watch him from a distance, saying little. Their calm is deliberate, a signal rather than a mood. They have learned that stillness can be persuasive, that waiting can bend outcomes. There are moments when silence grows uncomfortable, when someone clears his throat or adjusts a belt simply to remind himself that he exists. These small human sounds anchor the scene, preventing it from drifting into abstraction. A clerk whispers to another, "Not yet." The other nods. Soon. No clauses are read aloud yet, no seals prepared. This is the chapter before the chapter, the breath before speech. What matters now is presence, the fact that neither side leaves. As afternoon leans toward evening, the air cools. Cloaks are drawn tighter. The meadow seems to exhale, as if settling into the truth of what it hosts. History does not announce itself. It allows itself to be discovered. John steps forward briefly, just beyond his tent. The barons meet his gaze without moving. For a heartbeat, the meadow holds only this exchange, not hostility, not warmth, but recognition. They are bound together now, whether they wish it or not. Fear remains, but it has changed shape. It is no longer fear of confrontation, but fear of collapse, of what happens if they fail to find language strong enough to hold power in place. The river continues on. It has seen camps rise and fall before. It will see them again. But this gathering, small and tense and quiet, leaves a mark not on its waters, but on the idea of rule itself. As dusk approaches, lamps are lit. Their glow is soft, contained, refusing spectacle. Faces appear warmer, lines gentler. Even suspicion grows tired. The human need for rest presses against political resolve. Nothing is concluded tonight. But something essential has occurred. The fears that arrived separately now face each other across open ground. They do not vanish. They acknowledge one another, and in that acknowledgement, possibility takes root. The meadow remains neutral, patient, unchanged. Yet when men finally withdraw to their tents, they do so knowing that words must soon be written. Carefully, precisely, to carry what this place has demanded. Morning returns to Runnymede without ceremony. Mist lifts slowly from the grass, revealing tents damp with dew and men who slept lightly, if at all. The river continues its steady passage, reflecting pale sky and muted colours. Nothing about the meadow announces that words spoken here today will outlive kingdoms, and yet something has changed. The air feels prepared. Parchment is unrolled. Clerks smooth its surface with deliberate care, as though calming an anxious animal. Ink is tested, quills are trimmed. These small acts carry a gravity usually reserved for prayer. Around them, men gather closer, not crowding, but attentive. The moment has arrived for language to do what force cannot. The first clause is read aloud. The voice is steady, chosen for its calm rather than authority. Words move into the open air slowly, deliberately, as if unsure how they will be received. They speak of custom, of restraint, of limits remembered rather than invented. The meadow listens. There is no immediate response. Power does not like to be surprised by clarity. John's face reveals little, but his stillness tightens. Each sentence feels like a narrowing corridor. He hears not rebellion, but definition, and definition has always been dangerous to unchecked rule. Another clause follows. This one speaks of inheritance, of lands passing without arbitrary interference, of sons not punished for their father's debts. A murmur passes through the barons, brief and restrained. These words touch lives directly. They are not abstract ideals. They are hearths, fields, futures. John leans toward one of his counselors. His voice is low. This goes too far. The reply comes just as quietly. It is what they will not release. The reading continues. Justice is named next, not as favor, not as commodity, but as obligation. The words are careful, almost gentle, yet they land heavily. To no one will justice be sold, to no one denied, to no one delayed. Silence follows, longer this time. Some phrases feel sharper than steel because they cut without blood. They do not threaten, they declare. John shifts his weight. He considers interruption, then refrains. Every clause read aloud strengthens its presence. To stop the reading would be to acknowledge fear of what comes next. A baron speaks, his tone measured. These are not new demands. Your grace, they are old understandings. John meets his gaze. Old understandings serve old circumstances. Then let them serve again. The baron answers, not defiantly, but firmly. The exchange ends there. Neither presses further. Words are precious now. Wasted speech could undo hours of patience. Clause by clause, the document grows. There are lines about imprisonment, that no free man shall be seized without lawful judgment. Lines about fines, that punishment must fit the offence, not the appetite of the crown. Lines about councils, about consent, about the shared responsibility of governance. Each clause is a small boundary placed around power. John resists inwardly. He feels the weight of centuries pressing against this moment. Kings before him ruled by command, not permission. To accept these words feels like stepping into a narrower world, yet the barons do not frame this as loss. They frame it as order. Order has its appeal. The discussion grows more intense, but never loud. Men interrupt politely. Corrections are suggested. Phrases are revised. Language is sharpened, softened, rebalanced. This is not the chaos of argument, but the discipline of negotiation. A clerk hesitates, then asks softly, "Shall this apply to all, my lord?" A pause. John considers. To free men, he says at last. The distinction matters. It reveals the limits of the moment. This is not universal justice. It is incremental. History rarely moves in leaps. It inches forward, burdened by the assumptions it carries. Still, something essential is happening. For the first time, the law is being spoken aloud as something separate from the will of the king. It exists on the parchment, in the air, between men. It does not belong to one voice. The barons listen intently, correcting where memory fails, insisting where experience has taught them caution. They know the fragility of this effort. They know how easily words can be bent once written. That is why they labor over each one. John grows quieter. He begins to recognize the structure forming, not a trap, but a framework. one that still leaves him power, but no longer leaves him alone with it. The realization is unsettling, yet there is also relief in constraint. Boundaries can stabilize what they limit. As the reading nears its end, fatigue settles over the meadow. Eyes ache. Throats dry. But attention does not waver. Everyone present understands that omission would matter as much as inclusion. A final clause is read. It speaks of enforcement, of a council empowered to hold the king to his word. This is the sharpest edge of all. John stiffens visibly. This, he says, breaking the rhythm, undermines the crown. A baron answers, calm but unwavering. It preserves it. The words hang between them, unadorned. No argument follows. None is needed. Both understand the truth embedded there. Power unchecked corrodes itself. Power bound may endure. The reading concludes. No applause follows. No declarations of victory. The meadow exhales, collectively, as though releasing a breath held too long. What remains is a document heavy with intention and uncertainty. The river continues on. Clerks gather the parchment carefully. Ink dries. The sun shifts, casting longer shadows. Nothing has been sealed yet. Nothing is final. But something irreversible has occurred. Law has spoken aloud, and it has been heard. For the voiceless, those absent from this meadow, unnamed and unseen, these words offer something fragile but real. Not freedom, not equality, but recognition. A promise that power must answer to something beyond itself. As the men disperse to rest and reconsider, the clauses linger in the air, sharper than steel, quieter than threat. They wait for wax and seal, for acceptance or betrayal. They wait, patient as the river, confident in their endurance. Some words arrive quietly, yet refuse to leave. The meadow is calm this morning, brushed with pale light and the soft movement of air. Yesterday's arguments have settled into something more careful, more precise. What remains is not a clash of wills, but a search for language strong enough to endure distrust. The parchment is unrolled again. Lines already agreed upon rest on its surface, dark and deliberate. They carry the weight of negotiation, compromise, restraint. Yet among them, one space remains unfinished, waiting not for debate, but for courage. A clerk clears his throat and reads, "To no one will we sell justice. To no one will we deny it. To no one will we delay it." The sentence enters the air without ornament. It is simple, almost spare, and because of that, it is dangerous. For a moment, no one speaks. The words seem to stand alone, as if testing whether they will be challenged. Around them, the meadow feels smaller, attentive. Even the river seems to soften its sound, as though listening. Justice. Named plainly, stripped of favour and fee, the barons exchange brief glances. This is what they have been reaching for, sometimes without knowing how to say it. Not a list of privileges, but a principle. Not protection for themselves alone, but a boundary placed around power itself. One baron nods slowly. Another folds his hands. No one rushes to praise the sentence. Praise would weaken it. Silence allows it to settle. John does not move. He hears the words as a narrowing path. Justice unsold means revenue lost. Justice underlaid means pressure applied. Justice undenied means judgment no longer withheld for leverage. This single sentence reaches further than many clauses combined. He feels its weight immediately. Such absolutes, he says at last, his voice controlled, leave little room for the crown. A baron answers gently, they leave room for trust. The exchange is brief, almost cautious. Yet it carries the tension of something irreversible. This is not a technical clause. It is a declaration about the nature of rule. The clerk waits, quill hovering. John looks down at the parchment. He remembers other moments when words were used as instruments. Promises extended, then withdrawn. Justice delayed until convenience allowed it. He has ruled as kings before him ruled. No one taught him another way. Yet here, in this meadow, that way is being named. Justice is no longer something he grants. It is something expected. The barons do not argue further. They have learned when stillness is stronger than persuasion. The sentence does not need defense. Its clarity does that work. Around them, witnesses shift slightly, aware they are hearing something that will travel far beyond Runnymede. Merchants will repeat it. Clerics will copy it. Generations not yet born will read it and feel its certainty without knowing its cost. Ink is prepared. The clerk glances once more toward the king, not for instruction, but for acknowledgement. John hesitates, the pause visible, human. In that hesitation leaves the entire struggle of the crown, pride weighed against necessity, control against survival. He inclines his head. The quill touches parchment. Ink flows slowly, deliberately, filling the letters with permanence. This is not gold changing hands. This is something heavier. Gold can be reclaimed. Words once released resist return. The sentence joins the others, unassuming in appearance, immense in implication. No cheers follow. The barons do not celebrate. They understand that words alone do not guarantee obedience. Enforcement will matter. Memory will matter. But for now, acknowledgement is enough. John withdraws slightly, as if needing distance from what has been done. He tells himself this is concession, not surrender. He reminds himself that power remains, even constrained. Yet something in him recognizes the shift. For the first time, justice has been spoken as something separate from his will. The meadow absorbs the moment without reaction. Grass bends, clouds move. The river continues on, unchanged. History rarely pauses for applause. As the parchment is rolled again, the sentence lingers. It is repeated quietly among the barons, not as triumph, but as reassurance. They know how easily such promises can be tested. Still, they have given justice a voice. Beyond this meadow, countless lives remain untouched by this moment. Peasants will still toil. Inequality will endure. This is not the end of injustice. It is the naming of a principle that will outlive its authors. That is its power. The king prepares to seal what has been written. He does not smile. He does not protest. He accepts the necessity of the moment, even as he plans how to survive it. Power, when pressed, learns adaptability before humility. Yet the sentence stands. It does not accuse. It does not threaten. It simply declares that justice is not for sale. Not today, not tomorrow, not by any hand, however crowned. As daylight shifts and the meeting moves toward conclusion, this line remains the quiet heart of the document. Others will matter, certainly, but this one will be remembered. Because it speaks not of structure, but of restraint. Because it names justice as something owed, not earned. And because once spoken, it cannot be unheard. At Runnymede, the air holds its breath. Not because something grand is about to happen, but because something reluctant is. King John sits beneath a canopy that feels thinner than it looks. The river moves beside him, slow and unconcerned, carrying no opinion of crowns or charters. Around him stand men who have come not to praise him, nor to destroy him, but to bind him with words. The parchment waits on the table, pale and patient. It is not beautiful. It does not glow. It bears no poetry, only clauses, careful and sharp, shaped by fear and memory. John studies it with a narrowed gaze, as one might look at a wound that refuses to close. He has argued, delayed, bargained. Now there is little left to do but finish what has begun. This moment does not arrive with ceremony. There is no trumpet, no proclamation to the sky. Those gathered know better. They understand that this is not triumph. It is containment. The barons do not smile. They watch, silent, measuring each breath the king takes, each movement of his hands. They have learned caution from years of broken promises. John's face reveals little, but inside him, resistance still stirs. He does not believe these words will hold him forever. He believes, as he always has, that power bends only when forced and springs back when pressure eases. This seal to him is not surrender. It is delay. The wax is brought forward, warm and red, glistening like something alive. It smells faintly of resin and heat. The color is the color of authority, of blood, of things made binding by tradition rather than trust. John watches it drip, watches it pool, and for a moment, something like hesitation passes through him. Not regret. Calculation. He lifts the seal. It is heavier than it looks, engraved with symbols meant to last longer than any man. His hand tightens. The barons lean forward without meaning to. The river continues its work. When the seal presses into the wax, the sound is dull and final. Not loud enough to echo, but strong enough to be remembered. The imprint forms slowly, deliberately, as if the document itself is learning what it has become. Law, for the first time in England, has been given a shape that even a king must acknowledge. There is no cheer, no prayer, only a collective release of breath, as though the meadow itself has been holding tension in its grass. This is not the end of conflict. Everyone here knows that, but it is a pause, and pauses matter in history. They are where futures slip in unnoticed. John withdraws his hand. The seal cools. The charter is complete, yet agreement has not occurred. Consent has not bloomed. What has happened instead is narrower and more fragile. Power has been checked, not transformed. The king has complied, not conceded. In his mind, John is already elsewhere. He thinks of Rome. He thinks of allies, of letters yet to be written. He thinks of how words can be undone by other words, how promises can be dissolved by authority greater than parchment. This document, he believes, will not outlive his will. The barons sense this. They read his stillness not as peace, but as plotting. That is why they demanded enforcement clauses, committees, mechanisms of restraint. They have learned that trust alone dissolves too easily. They know this charter must be watched, guarded, remembered. Messengers wait at the edges of the field, ready to carry copies outward, like seeds scattered carefully. The words must travel, must be seen, must exist beyond this meadow. A single document is vulnerable. Many are harder to erase. The river moves on. It has seen kings before. It will see others. It does not slow for wax or seals or history. Yet in its passing, it carries reflection, and perhaps that is enough. Something has been reflected here that cannot be unseen. John rises. The meeting begins to loosen, not into celebration, but into dispersal. Tents will fall. Horses will be readied. Men will return to stone halls and uneasy homes. The meadow will empty, and the grass will lift itself again. What remains is a document that no one fully trusts, signed by a king who does not intend to obey it, protected by men who are not sure they can enforce it, and yet it exists. That alone is new. For the first time, authority has been forced to write down its limits, not whispered, not implied, but spelled out in ink. Even if those limits are challenged tomorrow, they have been named today. And names have power. Somewhere beyond the meadow, villagers sleep unaware, their lives balanced quietly on decisions made far from their doors. They will not hear of clauses or seals, only of rumors carried by travelers and priests. Yet what is done here will one day touch them, in courts and customs, in the way disputes are heard and punishments weighed. It will take years, generations, for this moment to reach them, softened by time and struggle. History often moves this way, beginning among the powerful, then drifting outward, changing as it goes. Tonight, the change is faint, almost imperceptible, like a shift in weather before rain. But it is present, and it will not entirely fade. Even now, the men who stand closest feel it only as unease, a sense that something irreversible has been set in motion without permission or blessing. It lingers quietly, like a thought that returns just as sleep begins to take hold and refuses to leave without consequence. As dusk gathers, the charter is folded, carefully, almost reverently, not because it is sacred, but because it is dangerous. Words like these change things slowly, then all at once. The seal has been set. The king has not agreed, and in that narrow space between obedience and rebellion, England holds its breath, waiting to see whether restraint can endure the night. At dawn, Runnymede looks ordinary again. Mist lifts from the grass in thin, uncertain ribbons, and the river resumes its quiet labour as if nothing has happened. The tents are coming down. Ropes loosen. Pegs lift from earth that remembers pressure but does not protest. What was tense only hours before now feels strangely hollow, like a room after an argument has ended without resolution. The charter lies folded on a table, its wax seals cooled, their edges dull. It is no longer a negotiation. It is an object. That change alone feels dangerous. Scribes bend over fresh parchment, copying each clause with care that borders on reverence. Their hands move steadily, though their thoughts wander ahead, imagining roads, horses, weather, and the uncertainty of safe arrival. Ink dries slowly in the morning air. Messengers wait nearby, chosen for reliability rather than speed. Each receives a copy, rolled, wrapped, protected against rain and loss. These men are not soldiers. They carry no weapons beyond their purpose. They understand that what they bear must survive distance and rumour, must arrive intact, unquestioned, believable. Hope, when written, travels more carefully than fear. The barons linger longer than expected. There is no rush to leave, no appetite for celebration. They speak quietly among themselves, voices low, as though the meadow might be listening. Some feel relief, others feel suspicion, most feel both at once. They have won something that can be taken back, and that knowledge tempers every breath. King John is already gone. He leaves without farewell, surrounded by guards, his thoughts sealed tighter than the wax he has pressed. His departure creates a space that no one rushes to fill. Without him, the field feels lighter, yet less secure. Power, even constrained, leaves an imprint when it moves away. As the sun climbs, the meadow empties, hooves disturb the grass. Wheels cut shallow lines into damp soil. Each group departs in a different direction, carrying its own version of what has occurred. For some, this is a promise. For others, a pause. For many, it is simply another moment of uncertainty in a long season of strain. The river flows past them all. It reflects banners and sky without judgment, carrying fragments of sound downstream until they dissolve into water. It has no memory of oaths or seals, Long after men have gone, it will continue to move, smoothing the banks where feet once stood in opposition. Nature does not enforce agreements, it merely endures them. Across England, word begins to spread, uneven and incomplete. In abbeys and halls, copies are unrolled and read aloud, sometimes carefully, sometimes carelessly. Listeners strain to understand language that feels formal and distant, yet strangely intimate. These words speak of limits, of processes, of protections. They do not promise happiness. They promise procedure. For the common people, little changes at once. Fields still demand labour. Taxes still weigh heavy. Sheriffs still knock. Yet something subtle has shifted, like a door left slightly open. A future argument has been given a script. A grievance, a vocabulary, that matters even if it is not yet felt. The church watches closely. Bishops consider how this document intersects with faith, with obedience, with Rome. Some see opportunity. Others see danger. Silence, after interdict, has taught England how absence can speak. Now words return, cautiously, measured against authority both earthly and divine. Among the barons, plans are made quietly. They discuss enforcement, counsels, watchfulness. No one believes the king will remain bound without reminder. Trust, once broken, is replaced by vigilance. Peace, they understand, is not a state. It is an activity requiring constant attention. The charter itself begins its fragile life, vulnerable to fire, to water, to denial. It exists only insofar as people insist that it exists. Its power is not in ink or wax, but in memory and repetition. Each reading strengthens it. Each forgetting weakens it. As days pass, the urgency fades slightly, replaced by waiting. England holds itself in suspension, unsure whether to exhale fully. Farmers look to the sky. Merchants count risks. Lords listen for rumours from the court. No one is certain which version of the future has just been set in motion. Yet beneath the uncertainty, something steadier forms. The idea that power can be written down, that authority can be named, measured, questioned. This idea moves slowly, like the river, shaping thought rather than land. It does not announce itself, it settles. Night returns, and with it, quiet. Candles burn low in places where the charter is discussed once more, softly, as if speaking too loudly might undo it. Outside, England sleeps uneasily, suspended between what has been promised and what will be tested. The meadow at Runnymede lies empty under the stars, its work finished for now. Grass rises where boots once pressed. Dew gathers where wax once cooled. History has passed through, leaving no mark that the eye can keep, only a pause that the mind cannot forget. In distant castles, old men who have seen rains come and go sense the difference without naming it. They feel it in the way conversations hesitate, in the way commands are now recalled and repeated. Young men feel it too, though they cannot explain why the world seems fractionally altered. Nothing visible has changed, yet possibility has entered the room, quiet and persistent, asking to be acknowledged. Even resistance begins to adapt, sharpening itself against a boundary it did not know existed before today. Time alone will decide whether this pause becomes habit or merely memory, whether restraint learns endurance, or whether power, impatient and clever, finds another path around the words meant to hold it. For now, waiting prevails. Quietly. The peace does not last long enough to settle. It loosens instead, like mist thinning under a rising sun, present but already retreating. In the days after Runnymede, England breathes carefully, as though any sudden movement might shatter what little balance has been won. The charter travels. The words spread, and in the quiet spaces between hope and habit, power begins to stir. King John does not sleep easily. His nights are restless, broken by thoughts that circle and return. He feels the charter as a weight rather than a boundary, something laid upon him without consent. To him, obedience is not virtue but delay. He has ruled by command, by fear, by force. Being ruled in return feels unnatural, almost offensive. Within stone walls, far from the meadow, candles burn late. Parchment is brought again, not to be copied, but to be undone. John sits with trusted clerks, men chosen for discretion rather than wisdom. Their voices remain low, their words careful, as if the walls themselves might listen. This charter binds too much, John says, his fingers resting flat on the table. His tone is measured, but beneath it moves something sharp. It places my crown in other hands. One clerk hesitates. Sire, the barons believe it necessary. John's mouth tightens. The barons believe many things. Silence follows, thick and uneasy. Then another voice speaks, older, quieter. There are authorities beyond England. John looks up. His eyes narrow, then brighten slightly. Rome has always been there, distant and powerful, a voice that can unmake as easily as it blesses. The Pope, he knows, has no love for baronial defiance. Obedience to kings is a language the Church understands well. A letter is drafted, not openly, not with ceremony. It is framed as an appeal, a plea for justice, a reminder of loyalty. John presents himself as a king coerced, a ruler bound against divine order. The charter, he writes, is an insult to authority granted by God. He seals the message with care, as though sealing his own release. The messengers who carry this letter move quietly, unaware of the weight they bear. Roads stretch ahead, long and uncertain. Time, once again, becomes a weapon. John does not need immediate reversal. He needs only the promise of it. Meanwhile, the barons wait. They sense the shift before they can explain it. Meetings grow more frequent. Glances linger longer than before. Trust, already thin, frays further at the edges. They have lived too long under broken vows to relax fully now. In one hall, a younger baron speaks aloud what others have kept private. Do you believe he will keep it? An older man exhales slowly. I believe he will try not to. This is not cynicism, it is memory. They have seen how power bends when watched and snaps back when it senses freedom. The charter was never meant to be self-sustaining. It was meant to be enforced. And enforcement requires unity, patience, and resolve. Qualities harder to maintain than anger. The Church listens from its own quiet distance. Bishops exchange letters, weighing allegiance against advantage. Rome's silence is noted. Silence, everyone has learned, is never empty. It is a space where decisions gather strength. Across England, sheriffs test boundaries. Some pause before acting. Others proceed as before, curious to see which commands will be challenged. The law exists now, written and spoken, but habit is stubborn. It resists change without pressure. John waits. He smiles in public. He reassures in measured tones. Peace, he says when asked. We move forward together. Yet his eyes do not rest easily. They search constantly, calculating the distance between restraint and escape. The charter begins to feel less like a shield and more like a provocation. Its very existence reminds the king of what has been taken from him, even temporarily. To accept limits would require a transformation John has never known. He does not see power as something to share, only something to reclaim. Weeks pass. Then news arrives, carried carefully, almost reverently. Rome has answered. The papal judgment is decisive. The charter, it declares, is invalid, unjust, extracted under duress. Obedience to it is not required. Authority, once again, flows downward unchallenged. John receives the news in silence, then allows himself a small, private smile. The relief he feels is immediate, but not complete. Power restored is never as secure as power unquestioned. He knows resistance will follow, yet he also knows that resistance without legitimacy fractures easily. Word spreads quickly this time, sharper than hope ever travelled. Barons read the judgment with disbelief that hardens into resolve. Some feel betrayed. Others feel vindicated in their distrust. All understand now that the peace has ended. It was never meant to last, one says quietly. No, another replies. It was meant to reveal. England shifts again, this time toward fracture. Allegiances harden. Castles prepare. The language of law gives way, slowly, to the language of force. The charter does not disappear, but it weakens, stripped of authority, sustained only by memory and belief. Yet something remains unsettled. Even as John reclaims his freedom from restraint, he cannot erase what has been seen. The idea of limits has been spoken aloud. It has entered conversation, thought, expectation. Power may push back, but it now does so against resistance it did not face before. The return of unease spreads quietly, like cold through stone. People feel it in the way voices lower, in the way doors close more firmly at night. Peace has proven thin, but it has also proven possible. That knowledge lingers, dangerous and persistent. History pauses here, not in calm, but in tension. The charter lies wounded, not dead. Power stands tall again, but something in its posture has changed. It is no longer alone on the field. The unraveling does not arrive all at once. It comes thread by thread, quietly at first, as though England itself hopes the fabric might hold if no one pulls too hard. But power has pushed back, and now resistance stiffens in reply. What was once restraint becomes resentment. What was once pause becomes fracture. Castles close their gates. Banners lift where none had flown before. Roads feel longer, more dangerous. Travellers measure each mile with caution, listening for rumours carried faster than truth. The land senses the change before it fully understands it, the way animals grow restless before a storm. King John moves quickly now, his hesitation burned away. Orders are sent, sharp and unmistakable. Sheriffs are instructed to reclaim authority without apology. The language of compromise fades, replaced by commands that expect obedience, not discussion. To rule, he believes, is to act before doubt can speak. The barons answer in kind. They gather not in secrecy, but in open defiance, their patience finally exhausted. They have seen the charter cast aside like an inconvenience, its promises dismissed by distant authority. What was written has been denied, and denial demands response. In one stone hall, voices rise briefly before settling again into grim resolve. He has broken faith, a baron says, his hand resting on the table as if to steady himself. He never meant to keep it, another replies, quieter, older. Now he has said so aloud. There is no shouting, no grand declaration. Only the shared understanding that words have failed, and that force has returned to the centre of the stage. This is not the war they wanted, but it is the war they recognise. England fractures along familiar lines. Loyalties divide households, counties, even families. Some cling to the king out of duty or fear. Others align with the barons, not out of rebellion, but out of wariness. They have been taxed, fined, commanded, ignored. The charter had named their suffering. Its rejection feels personal. The countryside bears the cost first. Fields go untended. Markets thin. Armed men pass through villages without asking permission. Their presence a reminder that power, when contested, always looks for bodies to stand behind it. People learn to watch the road before they speak. The Magna Carta moves into hiding. Not physically lost but politically wounded, its words survive in memory, in whispered references, in arguments framed by what might have been. It no longer protects, it provokes. John responds with force and calculation. He calls upon foreign allies, mercenaries who know no local loyalty, only payment. Their arrival sharpens fear. English soil absorbs unfamiliar boots, and with them, the sense that the struggle has grown larger than principle. Power, once challenged, rarely limits its response. Castles fall, others hold. Sieges stretch time into long, grinding days where hunger speaks louder than ideology. In these moments, the charter feels distant, almost irrelevant. Survival replaces justice as the primary concern. Yet even here, in the narrow spaces between despair and endurance, its presence lingers. A soldier mutters to another as they wait through the night, backs pressed to cold stone. They said there would be rules now. The other snorts softly. Rules only last while someone enforces them. This is the cruel education of civil war. Ideals do not vanish, but they are tested by exhaustion. England learns how quickly order dissolves when authority and legitimacy no longer align. The Church attempts to mediate, to calm, to reclaim moral ground. But it too is divided, caught between obedience and conscience, between Rome's authority and England's suffering. Bells ring in some towns, fall silent in others. Faith, like law, is strained by violence. King John grows harsher, not stronger. Each act of suppression feeds resistance. Each victory feels temporary, hollowed by the knowledge that loyalty forced is loyalty waiting to flee. He has regained authority, but not peace. The barons, too, discover the cost of defiance. Unity proves difficult to maintain under pressure. Some falter. Others press harder, convinced that retreat now would erase the meaning of all they have risked. They fight not only for power, but for proof that resistance was not foolish. Time blurs. Seasons pass marked by smoke instead of harvest. England's rivers carry reflections of burning towns alongside drifting ash. Nature continues its cycles, indifferent to human claims of right and rule. The land endures what men impose upon it. Yet beneath the chaos, something quieter persists. The idea that authority can be challenged, that a king can be bound, even if only briefly. This idea does not stop swords, but it does shape how men speak of why they raise them. The Charter, though broken, has named injustice clearly enough that it cannot be unnamed. Even John cannot escape its shadow. In moments of solitude, the words return to him, unwelcome and insistent. He dismisses them, yet they linger, reminders that power once hesitated in a meadow and pressed wax instead of will. That memory irritates him more than any army. The war grinds on until exhaustion dulls its edge. Neither side achieves the clarity it seeks. England is changed, though no one can yet say how. The Charter lies damaged, its authority stripped, its future uncertain. But it has survived exposure, conflict, denial, and survival itself becomes a form of quiet resistance. People speak of it now with a mixture of bitterness and longing. Once, they say, the king was made to listen. The sentence carries more weight than any clause. As the fighting slows, not into peace but into pause, England stands amid ruins both physical and moral. Agreements have collapsed, trust lies scattered. Yet the words remain, circulating like embers beneath ash, capable of reigniting when conditions allow. History does not close this chapter with resolution. It leaves it open, uneasy, unresolved. Power has reclaimed its ground, but at great cost. Resistance has failed to secure its promise, but has planted something stubborn in the soil of thought. Civil war fades eventually, not because it is solved, but because it consumes itself. What follows will not erase what has been learned. Even broken vows leave echoes, and England has learned to hear them. King John does not die as he lived. There is no dramatic reckoning, no moment of clarity, no final apology shaped by regret. He dies quietly, weakened by illness and exhaustion, in a land worn thin by his rule. The crown passes from his hands without ceremony, as though even power itself has grown tired of him. England exhales, not in relief, but in uncertainty. The war has drained the land. Castles stand scarred. Trust lies brittle. And now the throne is empty, waiting not for a strong man, but for a child. Henry is 9 years old. The crown sits too heavily on his small head, a symbol far larger than his understanding. He does not yet know the weight of oaths broken or charters denied. He has not learned the habits of suspicion or pride. He knows only that the world around him feels tense, watchful, waiting. Others step forward to rule in his name. Regents gather, men shaped by failure and fatigue, seasoned enough to know that force alone cannot heal what has been fractured. William Marshall stands among them, older now, respected, carrying the quiet authority of experience rather than command. He has seen ambition consume kings. He has survived long enough to learn restraint. They meet not in triumph, but in resolve. England cannot endure another season of defiance. The barons are restless. The land is fragile. Something must change, or everything will collapse. The boy must inherit peace, one voice says softly. And how do we give it to him? Another asks. William Marshall answers without raising his voice, by choosing what the last king would not. The Magna Carta returns, not as it was, but as it must be. The most contentious clauses are trimmed away, the sharpest edges softened. Not because the idea has failed, but because survival requires compromise. What remains is steadier, more careful. A charter that seeks endurance rather than confrontation. This time, there is no king resisting, no calculating glare, only a child whose name will be written where authority must rest. The regents do not pretend this is ideal. They accept it because it is necessary. The barons are invited again, not to a meadow, but to a conversation shaped by exhaustion and hope. They arrive wary, bearing memories of betrayal. Yet something is different now. The crown no longer speaks with one stubborn voice. It speaks through caretakers who understand fragility. A baron studies the revised charter, his finger tracing familiar lines. Will it hold? William Marshall meets his gaze. It will be honoured, he says. Because this time it must. Trust does not bloom instantly, it never does. But it stirs, cautious and tentative. The barons have lost much, so has the crown. What binds them now is not fear, but fatigue. Everyone is tired of breaking the same ground. The charter is sealed again. No defiance shadows the moment. No secret letters wait in preparation. The wax cools beneath hands that understand consequence. This is not idealism. It is wisdom earned the hard way. Across England, word spreads more gently than before. Not with urgency, but with reassurance. Bells ring again where silence once lingered. Markets reopen. Fields are tended with renewed attention. Life does not heal instantly, but it resumes. The boy king is shown the charter one quiet afternoon. He does not read it fully. He cannot yet, but he touches the parchment, curious, respectful. Someone explains, in simple words, that it helps keep promises fair. Henry nods, absorbing what he can. He does not know he stands at a hinge of history. He knows only that adults speak more calmly when this document is mentioned. That tension eases when its presence is acknowledged. Power has knelt again, though few use that word. This time, the kneeling is quieter, less dramatic. It does not announce itself. It settles into practice, into habit, into expectation. That is how endurance begins. The regents govern carefully. They listen more than they command. They consult where John had dictated. The barons respond in kind, easing their grip, lowering their voices. Civil war loosens its hold, retreating not in defeat, but in irrelevance. The charter is reissued again in the years that follow, reaffirmed, recopied, remembered. Each repetition strengthens it, not as rebellion, but as structure. Law begins to feel less like a challenge to authority and more like its companion. England grows into this change slowly. Courts adjust, customs adapt. The idea that power must answer to something beyond itself settles into the collective mind. It is not perfect, it never will be, but it is present. The memory of John fades, not erased, but contextualized. He becomes a warning rather than a model. His failures teach what his successes never could. History often works this way, using broken figures to shape better paths. Henry grows, shaped by a different atmosphere. He inherits not unchecked power, but a framework. He learns that rule involves listening, that authority survives best when shared with principle. Whether he always remembers this is another story told elsewhere. But the foundation is laid here. The meadow at Runnymede remains silent, unchanged, yet its echo deepens. What began in fear and force now continues in patience and care. The charter endures not because it was perfect, but because it learned to bend without breaking. England, scarred but steadier, steps forward into something new. Not freedom, not equality, but accountability. A quiet, durable shift. Power has not vanished, it has learned to pause. And sometimes, a pause is enough to change the direction of centuries. Time does not hurry away from Runnymede, it walks. The meadow empties of tents and men, of armour and uneasy promises. But something stays behind, something lighter than iron, heavier than memory. Parchment folds, ink dries, and the river continues, as it always has, carrying reflections without judgment. The moment feels small, almost forgettable. No monument rises. No trumpet announces a new age. And yet, history has learned a new posture. The centuries begin to pass, not in leaps but in breaths. Kings follow kings. Crowns change hands. Wars flare and quiet again like embers stirred by careless feet. The Magna Carta is ignored, violated, resented, resurrected. It is confirmed and reconfirmed, copied and trimmed, misunderstood and rediscovered. At times it lies dormant, a relic tucked into chests and archives, consulted only by clerks and lawyers who speak in careful tones. At other times, it is pulled into the light, held up like a mirror when power grows too confident. It does not rule, it waits. Slowly, almost shyly, the idea within it begins to separate from the men who wrote it. What was once a negotiation between frightened barons and a cornered king becomes something larger, something less personal. The clauses loosen from their medieval bindings. They travel outward, carried by judges, scholars, rebels, and thinkers who sense that the words contain more than their authors intended. Law begins to breathe on its own. In courtrooms thick with dust and candle smoke, judges speak of custom and precedent. They search backward, not for a king's mood, but for an enduring principle. The notion takes hold that authority is not a possession, but a trust. That justice is not a favour, but a duty, that even the crown must answer when it overreaches. This is not progress that arrives cleanly. It arrives through struggle. Parliaments argue, monarchs resist. Blood is spilled in the name of order, and in the name of liberty, often indistinguishable until long after the noise fades. The Magna Carta does not prevent tyranny. It does not guarantee mercy. What it does is quieter, and perhaps more dangerous. It gives language to resistance. It offers a memory of restraint. It whispers, "This has been done before." Across generations, the Charter's spirit seeps into unexpected places. It echoes in petitions read aloud to kings who frown and stall. It appears in sermons that speak of moral law higher than earthly rulers. It settles into the bones of common law, shaping how disputes are heard, how punishment is measured, how power is questioned. The words endure not because they are perfect, but because they are incomplete. They invite interpretation. They provoke argument. They force each age to ask what justice should mean now, here, in this fragile moment. And so, the Meadow travels, not as a place, but as a memory carried forward, reshaped by those who need it. An ocean later, centuries removed from damp English grass, men gather again to write. They speak of representation, of consent, of rights that do not depend on birth or favour. They argue fiercely, aware of failure, haunted by the past. On their desks lie books and precedents, histories of struggle and restraint. Among them, the echo of a charter sealed under duress, reminding them that power, once unchecked, rarely checks itself. They do not copy the Magna Carta. They inherit its courage. Constitutions emerge, deliberate, structured, aspirational. They attempt what parchment at Runnymede only began. To bind authority permanently to principle. To make restraint habitual, not accidental. To ensure that law does not kneel to power, but stands beside it, steady and unafraid. Even then, the echo is not always honoured. Rights are declared and denied. Promises are written and betrayed. The law grows, but unevenly, favouring some, excluding others. The Meadow is remembered selectively. Yet, each time injustice sharpens too boldly, the old question returns. Patient and insistent, by what right? It is a question that unsettles thrones and offices alike. The Magna Carta never claims that people are equal. It never imagines democracy. It speaks from a world of hierarchy and fear. And yet it plants a seed more radical than equality, the idea that no one stands above the law entirely. That power, no matter how divine it claims to be, must explain itself. This idea does not fade, it deepens. Through revolutions and reforms, through courts and councils, through quiet cases that never make history books, the echo persists. It lives in appeals filed by the powerless, in judgments that restrain excess, in the expectation, fragile, often disappointed, that fairness should exist at all. You can feel it in the hush of a courtroom before a verdict is read, in the careful language of a ruling that limits authority, in the collective intake of breath when a law is struck down, not by force, but by reasoning. These moments are not grand, they are echoes. The Meadow has no monument, yet it appears wherever power hesitates, wherever leaders are reminded that command is not the same as legitimacy, wherever the governed expect explanation instead of decree. Time continues its patient work. Empires rise and fall. Flags change. Languages shift, but the posture learned at Runnymede, reluctant, imperfect, necessary, remains available to every age willing to remember. Power can kneel, and when it does, the world steadies, briefly. This is the quiet inheritance of the Magna Carta, not a document frozen in time, but a habit of thought. A reminder that fear can give birth to restraint, that weakness can produce wisdom, and that even flawed beginnings can shape enduring foundations. The river still flows, the meadow still waits, not for kings, but for moments when authority listens and law speaks softly but firmly in return. And now, as the voices soften and the parchment curls at the edges of time, let this final ember glow quietly within you. The Magna Carta was not born of purity or courage alone, but of fear, fatigue, and the fragile hope that restraint might outlast force. And so its candle burns still, not brightly, but faithfully, reminding the world that even power must one day listen. Thank you for sharing this quiet hour with me, for carrying the story forward simply by hearing it. In this stillness, you are part of the echo. This has been the sleeping hourglass, where the past tucks you in and time loosens its grip. If this brought you peace, you are always welcome to return. Now rest, let the river flow on, and drift gently into sleep.